We are having a 3-day training with officers from the community policing units. It's critical for them to be able to have the information because they are within the communities and interacting with community members throughout the country, particularly in terms of how do we support them in ensuring that they feel comfortable with some of the discussions they might find whenever they have that interaction with community members. So the 3-day workshop focuses on providing them an understanding and increased awareness on the issues relating to gender-based violence, and in particular one of the forms of gender-based violence, which is domestic violence. And so the 3 days have been spread out to provide them with opportunities to interact with one another so that they can understand what their personal values, attitudes, and norms are, and how that impacts the role of them as police officers, how their personal biases can influence the response that they give to the community when they come into the police stations to make reports, or the interactions that they have with them when they are going out into the communities to do public outreach. At the end of the session, we want to also include a component of self-care, because I think often for those persons in social services, in the caring professions, we tend to forget that the impact that trauma, secondary trauma, has on them also takes a toll. And so that will be the last segment of the 3-day session. So it's been filled with activities, group work, individual personal reflection sessions, because when we look at the topics that we are engaged in, such as gender and gender-based violence, there has to be a lot of personal reflection to really understand how your own upbringing has impacted the person you've become and how that impacts your role as a police officer.
The officers here represent the entire country. We have somebody from each district, from each office across the country, and we're pleased for that. So what we see on a frequent basis, our officers go into the schools across this country via a program called the Police Crime Prevention and Education Program. So we go in and do talks on areas such as drugs, not to join a gang, not to become a criminal, bullying, how to remain a positive young person, inclusive of gender-based violence. But these officers, for the most part, were going into these schools without sufficient information as it relates to gender-based violence. So we wanted them to come in a setting with the experts so that they could learn more and deliver a better understanding of what they've learned. It's not just for community policing. We want all officers to be trained in this, because gender-based violence affects a great majority of our community, and we want to do something to prevent the occurrence of crime. What we're doing here is preventive. When we respond to a call, that's reactive. So we want our officers better trained at the preventative level so that they could better respond should something happen. But we want to prevent an occurrence of any gender-based violence. But I want the public to understand that there is the 911 line that you could call 24 hours a day, any part of this country. And then there's also a hotline, 0800, a way out, that you could call anytime again, 24 hours a day. You could call that and police will respond. What we see oftentimes, and that is no fault of the police, we see survivors of domestic violence or gender-based violence makes a report in the first instance, and then they come back and say they don't want any other further action against it. And sometimes that leads to something else. But when we get our policy at the police department is that if a complaint is received at the police station, any police station for that matter across this country, it is dealt with. No police officer has the authority to drop the case before it reaches the court. So it has to be, if somebody wants to drop a case, it has to go to the court. That's the standing instruction by our Commissioner of Police.